your answer.
Hello and welcome to another episode of A Sip of Cinema only on SCTV. After a long hiatus, we're back.
MIA.
Yeah, due to illness and various other factors. So, back and ready to go with Running Man. We'll say hello to my co-host, my brother from the same mother, Andrew. So, Running Man. We'll get into it soon, but it's from 1987. So we're back in the 80s once again, and it's a very important action film within the scope of our film, sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger fandoms over the years. Sort of established Arnie is one of our favorite actors of all time. Just one of the many films from the 80s and the 90s. So we'll get into it soon if my voice holds up. So first things first, it's a sip of cinema. So let's see what we're sipping on. I've got something Aussie. Is that focusing?
Yeah.
So I got Starwood Twofold Australian whiskey, mate.
Australia.
That's funny. Yeah.
I got a bear.
It's really nice. So double grain sort of has this sort of really different from Scotch whiskey or bourbon. It has sort of this strawberry background.
Yeah, it's got a nice sweetness to it.
Yeah, it's really delicious, but not, badly sweet. It's like deliciously sweet. So, what have you got? I see a can there.
It's the
Ah, the Modelo.
Modelo
Oh, Dios
Siempre
mío.
Especial.
S- Especial cerveza.
Hopefully,
From
I give it a nice
Guadalajara,
pour.
Mexico. That's Modelo straight from Mexico to the shores of Melbourne. It's a nice
It's
pour.
just,
Some might say a perfect pour.
I would say it's a perfect pour. It almost went over, but it's just perfection
That's pretty
in a
good
pour.
based on the fact that we're live and he just did it like in front of the camera. So, here's to the Running Man. Established Arnold Schwarzenegger on our radar and mainly provided a fun action film to add to all the rest from the 80s. So, uh, memorable characters, memorable one liners. So, here's to the Running Man.
Cheers. It's quite warm today. This beer is going to go down nicely.
Mm. Yeah, I expect to be sweating as usual. All right, the Running Man. Actually, we're supposed to talk about our remembrances of the film first. So, for me, I think the thing that stuck out for the Running Man was the different characters, especially the different stalkers. The film was very video gamey in a way because Ben, the main character, had to overcome different bosses basically while trying to solve different puzzles to to earn his victory or his freedom by the end of the film. So it sort of hit all the sweet spots for us back in the 80s as kids. Even though it was a pretty violent movie. I mean, that's the theme of this entire series of ours is watching violence before we were probably supposed to, but we turned out okay. So what was your remembrance of Running Man?
I think I agree with what you said. You said it well. There's a lot of concepts that's introduced in this movie that's
Mm,
really entertaining. I think there's a lot of memorable moments as well. I
mm,
feel from like Richards running across the tarmac of the airport, trying to
yeah,
avoid getting captured, to like the game show audience winning prizes, betting on their hunters or who's gonna
the
get the next
Stalkers.
kill. Yeah, the
Mm,
stalkers. And yeah, and like the rocket launching tunnel cage thing.
oh yeah, the tunnel cage thing. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, that it's like
Yeah.
all these ideas was like very gamey, like you said, but
Mm,
like really, really cool concepts and really entertaining.
mm. And once again, another 90-minute movie that's doesn't overstay its welcome. It's just in and out, action packed,
In
funny.
and out, wham
It's
bam, thank you, ma'am.
it's everything you want, in an action film, sci-fi, dystopian action film. So you'll see some similarities to things like Total Recall, even RoboCop in terms of the satirization of future American society. So
Get a little bit of like that cyberpunk feel, some Blade Runner in there too.
yeah. All right. Running Man, 1987, directed by Paul Michael Glazer, who was one of Starsky and Hutch back in the 70s. But he also directed such 90s iconic films like The Air Up There and Kazam, starring
Oh,
Shaquille
really?
O'Neal.
Air Up There
Uh,
was that Kevin Bacon? No,
yeah,
it was the
Bacon. He goes
it
to
was
Africa.
Bacon.
Yeah.
Ah.
So, yeah. So two iconic 90s films for various reasons. Based on the novel by Stephen King, except Stephen King wrote it under a pseudonym. So he wasn't actually Stephen King when he wrote the book. And so the guy who actually organized to make the movie, like the executive producer or whatever, didn't know that the author of the book, Richard Bachman, was actually Stephen King. And so based on Stephen King's novel and the screenplay was written by Stephen D'Souza, who also worked on iconic films like 48 Hours, Commando, Die Hard 2, the Judge Dredd film. He worked on Knockoff, Van Damme and Rob Schneider.
Oh yeah, Knockoff. What a weird pair up.
Yeah, we haven't seen that in a while. And Street Fighter, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile. So yeah, that was interesting. And starring, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Maria Conchita Alonso as the female lead, who was very good. Jesse Ventura, I can't even talk. Jesse Ventura makes an appearance in this movie. So, 87, you may recall, Predator came out in 1987 as well. So we get a sort of a double dose of Arnie and Jesse Ventura that year. And Richard Dawson. So Richard Dawson was actually a real TV show host. So he hosted like this dating show in England in the 70s, and then he hosted like a Family Feud for 10 years. And so he started this movie 2 years after he sort of retired from doing game shows, television game shows. So I thought that was an interesting piece of trivia, that he's an actual game show host.
Yeah, because he played the role like perfectly.
Yeah,
like he's a bit of a diva as well.
It's kind of slimy, bit of a diva. Like he's always got his hand up like this, his finger. It's really annoying. Like he's always mincing about, but then at the same time, like yelling at everybody. And so it starts off with this animated introduction that could have been like an introduction from a video game very easily. Of all the animated guys running on the screen. And it's set in 2017. Okay, so
6 years
ago, basically. So 6 years ago, and the world is run by like a tyrannical dictatorship, basically. Like society is broken down. There's no real structure to society. Like you can see that there's a distinction between like the elites and just the regular people who are sort of fighting for survival. And so the most popular television show of all time, Running Man, is sort of a perfect encapsulation of this idea, where the people sort of fight for their lives, and the government sort of covers up what really happens to like the winners, quote unquote. They don't actually get out. They die. Spoiler alert. But it starts off with some sort of military operation in a helicopter, and Ben Richards is there. And he's basically saying, there's a bunch of civilians down there. We don't want to shoot them. We don't want to kill them, but then, his superior officers basically saying, no, we've got to take him out. But then Ben sort of doesn't want to follow orders. And so he starts fighting back. And then they almost throw him out of the chopper because it's like 5-on-1. And then we cut to Ben's punishment. 18 months later, he's working at this work camp this terrible work camp where people are dying all the time.
It's like
Basically,
a mine or something, isn't it?
yeah, they're extracting some sort of resources from the ground or
Some kind of
whatever.
toxic resource. Yeah.
Hmm. But it kind of reminds me also of Quaid's job as well. Even though
Yeah.
Quaid is just like breaking bricks with a jackhammer. It's sort of a similar, like, hard labor sort of job.
And typical
but-
Arnie has to carry that massive beam on his
yeah,
shoulder.
he always has to
So-
carry something.
some
Commando's-
massive, heavy piece of
Hmm.
equipment or log.
Yeah, Commander is carrying a log like that. Yeah. And Arnold's got a fake beard in this movie. I saw that. As someone who's had a beard for 6 years, you can tell when an actor just has a beard glued on, because the hair isn't like consistent. It's not like stuck together, like, or in a consistent pattern. It's sort of just puffy for some reason, for no reason. So
Just not, he's
Um,
not combing it. He's not
yeah,
putting any product in it.
like there's not enough hair. There's not enough hair follicles. That's what I'm trying to say. It just looks like it's stuck on, whatever. But he doesn't have the beard for long, so it doesn't really matter. So basically, we get glimpses of the prison camp, and there's lots of corpses everywhere. And they're sort of trapped by this electronic perimeter that kills the prisoners if they try to escape.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah. And so there's a nerd, there's a big black guy, and there's Arnold. So they're like a team. But the audience doesn't really know that yet. We just see these guys hanging out in the prison camp. And the nerdy guy is trying to crack some sort of code on this computer, but it's not working. And so eventually that sort of leads to a shootout, because you can't just start cracking a computer and then no one notices. This is a huge shootout. The bullets are flying everywhere. So in the meantime, they're sort of running cover for this nerdy guy who's trying to crack the code, but he keeps entering stuff and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work. And then at some point, the barrier actually goes down, but it's actually just temporary. So Chico, like the one Mexican guy they have to call it they call him Chico.
I think he's in he's in other movies too. He's usually the bad guy.
And so Chico thinks the barrier's down, but everyone's like, Chico, no.
Chico, come back!
Yeah, you can hear in that clip just like the cool sort of synth theme music.
Yeah, it's got that cyberpunky, like Shadowrun kind of tone to it.
Yeah, it's really, really good theme music. Really simple but really effective. Yeah, so we saw Chico's head explode. That was a really good piece of special effects, like the wide angle, and his head just boop.
Exploding watermelon.
Yeah.
Special effects.
Yeah, so just after that, the nerdy guy actually gets the barrier to go down, and so everyone escapes. Actually, I should say the nerdy guy is named Weiss, not Wise, Weiss. But anyway, if you need a name for that guy, and so we cut to Los Angeles in 2017. Looks a lot like Los Angeles in 2023. I don't see the difference between modern day LA and what what it's represented as in the movie. I mean, it's just really disgusting. No real difference. And Ben and his crew, like the other two guys, they're walking around in disguise. They're just wearing civilian clothes, and they go to a secret hideout to get their collars off, their shock collars that sort of blows their heads off. And so they're at the secret hideout, and they see, and on the TV we see an ad for the Running Man, and then we sort of get an introduction of what the TV show is all about. And of course, the TV has different, programming and brainwashing for kids, especially. And Ben says a really interesting line. He says the truth hasn't been very popular lately, which is very appropriate for these days as well.
Definitely.
So the old guy who's like removing their explosive devices, he's sort of suspicious of Ben, but then Ben, like, because Ben's like the supposedly the butcher of Bakersfield. So they actually framed Ben for the massacre we saw at the start of the film. And so these guys, they want to get out the city. Actually, just Ben wants to get out the city. Like the other guys are going to stay and try to, move on with their lives. But Ben like hops on a trailer.
They want to join with the other rebels and try to overthrow, I guess, authorities. And yeah, Richards doesn't want any part of it.
But Richards is supposed to meet his brother as well. So he made a plan to meet his brother at his brother's apartment. But before we get to that, we're introduced to Killian, which is a great name for the main villain of the film. I guess sort of gets to the point. Damon Killian. So we see him sort of arrive at the TV station in his limousine, and all the reporters are hanging around, and different fans and various people giving him a big reception. And so really interesting sort of character moment where he walks into the television studio building, and then he sort of gets hit in the leg by this old guy mopping the floor. He pretends to be really kind to him, but then in the elevator, it's like, no, that guy has to go. If he's not fired, then you are, or something. He tells.
Yeah, he's like, you're going to be cleaning the floor if he's not gone. Something like that.
Yeah. So it's pretty ruthless. I was cut back to Ben. Is in his what he thinks his brother's apartment, but he just finds some women's underwear. And so, there's a mystery about, what happened to his brother, whose apartment this is. And then we cut back again to Killian, and he's sort of running a tight ship in the television station. Everyone sort of treats him with respect out of fear mostly. And so we cut back to Ben, and Amber comes home, and Ben's like hiding out in Amber's apartment. And she comes in, and her house is like a smart home, basically. Like everything's voice activated, which is a nice touch. I mean, that's what it is these days. So,
yeah, I think like the idea of that technology being futuristic, that was a cool concept. But I think what really shows the age of a lot of these movies before the 90s is that usually the technology is really, really poor, really, really dated.
yeah.
So that's usually painful to see, as like they'll be doing something, like putting in something on a computer, and the computer looks like ancient compared to today.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like the future. I think that's the only issue really. when you watch back these old movies.
Well, there's that, and also the lack of the internet. Like the interconnectivity of information. Like some movies do get that, like the interconnectivity between people. Like in Total Recall, when they're communicating via like video phone, like that's fine. Like that's over some sort of network. But in this case, Amber's home would be connected through some sort of Wi-Fi network, maybe even satellite. But it's just like she just comes home and starts talking to a house basically, and everything turns on that she wants to turn on, including the television. And we see this ad.
Are you ready for pain? Are you ready for suffering? If the answer is yes, then you're ready for Captain Freedom's workout.
Yes, it's America's own.
When you hear the tone, control your jealousy and leave your message.
Yes, random Jesse Ventura in
Captain
spandex.
Freedom.
Captain Freedom. Maybe that's why he's so angry later in the film. Like he was forced to do these ridiculous ads. Like
No,
aerobics ads,
he's
basically.
supposed to be a retired stalker.
Yeah.
So he's probably, this is his day job now.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, he's retired. He's just doing goofy ads. And so Amber, she comes home from work, I'm assuming. First thing she does is crunches while she's watching the news. So she's really dedicated. And since it's the news, Ben is the top story. So they're sort of spreading more like lies about Ben on the news, saying he's armed and dangerous, like he's on the loose, like you got to watch out. And so it turns out, Ben sort of finds out, I think it was on a piece of paper or something, that his brother was taken for re-education.
Oh, it was Amber tells him. She's like,
Oh yeah, Amber tells him.
she moved in like a month or 3 months ago.
Yes,
and all she
she
just heard that the previous tenant got taken away for re-education.
Yeah, so that's right. So he sort of sneaks up on her, like stands over her, and then puts his hand over her mouth while she's trying to do crunches. And so so she doesn't trust him, of course. Like she doesn't trust him at all until much later in the film. And so he's trying to get answers from her, but she only knows as much as she knows. And then we cut back to Killian, and he's talking to his producer about finding some potential contestants. Sacrifices perhaps for the TV show. And then on the news, he sees Ben Richards on TV, like running. And then his producers like, no, we can't get that guy. He's a military prisoner. And then Killian's like, watch me. Like, let's say it seems like he can just get anyone he wants. And so back at the apartment, Ben's tied up Amber on her abs bench. Turns out she has a lot of illegal goods, like clothing. So society is so controlled that even clothing is illegal. So guess what the mayor...
Censored music as well is illegal.
Censored music.
Certain music.
Yeah. So which means certain entertainment would also be censored. So the clothing thing is interesting because the current mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, he's suggesting as part of the net zero plan that people only have 3 outfits. They can only purchase 3 outfits per year, amongst other dystopian measures. So I thought that was an interesting parallel to 2023. So some scary parallels between this movie and current times that we had no idea about back in when we watched it in the 80s, but interesting from today's perspective. Of course, movement would also be tightly controlled, which is why Amber has a travel pass, which Ben takes. And then she's like, no, you can't take my travel pass. What are you doing? And then he lifts up her abs bench, which is nailed to the floor. And then he says, please, as he's picking the bench up. And then we cut to the airport, and they're sort of dressed like over the top tourists. Like he's got this Hawaiian shirt on and a hat. And she's got this bright pink dress on. And he's like holding her neck like this. Like he can snap her neck at any time.
So they were going to go to Hawaii.
Yeah. And so at the checkpoint, Ben just gives like one travel pass. And then the guy asks for her travel pass, and he like starts digging in her bag. And then pretending like you can't find it. And then the guy's like, just move on. But then as they're sort of walking towards the plane or whatever, she like smashes his balls and then makes a run for it. And so Ben like takes off across the tarmac, but is eventually captured. Probably because he's wearing loafers or something. But there was way too many people, so he's captured. And so he gets to meet.
Hi, cutie pie. You know, one of us is in deep trouble. You know who I am?
I've seen you before. You're the asshole on TV.
That's funny. I was going to say the same thing about you.
Yeah. Yeah, some nice banter between them. So at this stage of the movie, Ben thinks his friends got away, like they're fighting for the resistance, but they were actually captured as well by Killian. And so he sort of blackmails, or not blackmails, he threatens Ben that if Ben doesn't do the show, then he's going to force Ben's friends, Laughlin and Wise, to do the show instead. And so we move on to the preparation for the show. I remember this scene was like really memorable for me when I was a kid.
Is that when he gets the shots?
Like he's getting the shots, and
same.
like they put that stuff in the mouth guard in his mouth.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of Total Recall too, because they also give him some kind of drill injection as well.
Yeah, some really, really painful injection.
Yeah, that sciencey stuff is always cool, like for kids to watch. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, for sure. But that's what it would be like, right? It wouldn't be like this easy transition into participating in the show. Like there'd be some sort of pain involved for Ben. But that sort of visually prepares the audience for what's to come as well. It's like this completely ruthless dystopian television production consistent with the society within which it was formed. And so he gets thrown into a cell, and he gets knocked out until showtime, knocked out by some gas. And so Amber back at the airport's watching Ben's capture. But then the news, like I think it's back at her apartment, or well, I can't remember where she was, but
It's in her
back at
apartment.
her apartment, she's watching the news, and it falsely reports that Ben killed a bunch of people at the airport as he was escaping, and she knows that's completely false, and so she starts to wonder, what's really going on. And so one of the interesting aspects of participating on the show is that you get a court-appointed theatrical agent, and you have to sign some forms before you actually do the show. And so we get a glimpse into the command center. All the producers are there. And one of the producers is really sweaty. So another room where people are sweating in the 80s.
Yeah, no aircon.
And there's a lot of 80s dancing and music, like synchronized dancing and 80s music. And I suppose the contestants, you could consider to be similar to wrestlers, especially in terms of how they dress. And the stalkers, they're like celebrities at the time, like professional athletes. And so wasn't it that Buzzsaw?
Yeah,
He
Buzzsaw.
punches the fan.
Yeah, the fan steps in his face and just pushes him in his face out of the way onto the ground. This guy's, yeah, you see that? Buzzsaw touched me.
Yeah,
and he's
he's got blood.
bleeding.
Yeah. Blood pouring out his nose, and he's excited. So, and then he sort of goes over and lifts a motorcycle above his head. But yeah, the actor who played Buzzsaw, he was gigantic.
Yeah, he looked pretty jacked.
Bigger than Arnold Schwarzenegger at the time. So, probably the biggest guy. Like Dynamo was big, but he's fat. But Buzzsaw was big for different reasons. Like he was really in shape. And so Amber sees Ben at the studio. So Amber's walking past with her friend or whatever. And she sees Ben being hauled off to participate in the show. And her friend says to Amber, she's looking him up and down. She's like, you could have been killed or worse. If that guy wants to do something to you, there's no way you can stop him. Whatever.
Could have raped you and killed you, or killed you then raped you. There's nothing to stop a guy like that, something like that.
Yeah, almost like
she's got this thirsty look on her face.
Yeah, it's like admiration and fear at the same time. And so, like I said before, Running Man is the #1 show in the world. I suppose you can sort of view it from the perspective of the intersection between reality TV and game shows. So it wasn't really reality TV. We didn't have reality TV in the 80s. It sort of blew up in the 90s and then evolved in the 2000s. But it's sort of similar to that, sort of this take on reality, like realism, a live stream sort of thing with a game show format. But if the Running Man was around these days, it would be live streamed, right? And then the audience would be the global audience online, and they would be interacting, through a chat function of some sort. Yeah, I mean, you could, I wouldn't mind seeing a well done Running Man remade. It's always tricky to suggest it, but just with modern technologies and stuff like that,
yeah,
what it would be like in this time. with this technology, AI, like how would AI work within this world? There's a lot of room for that. And so Killian comes out. He's like, "Who loves you, and who do you love?" So the audience like really loves Killian, and he sort of plays it up like he's a professional. And so after Amber sees Ben, she starts sneaking around trying to find answers. But before that, Ben has to sign a contract. So this is one of the funniest moments in the film where he signs a contract and stabs the pen into the lawyer's back. So the people who are being stalked by the stalkers are called runners, and so Ben in this show is the star runner, and he's promoted as the butcher of Bakersfield, and so the crowd watches like a deep fake version of the opening scene from the film, where Ben actually gives the order to murder the civilians. And so the crowd's like booing, like they hate him.
And then they tear up his clothes and see his Running Man suit and like, yay!
Yeah. Yeah, the crowd are getting whipped up, like they really want blood. And so previous winners of the Running Man, Whitman, Price, and Haddad are supposedly partying in Hawaii after winning their freedom. But later in the film, we know that's not actually the case. And so as Ben's like sitting in the pod ready to get launched into the show, Killian reveals that Ben's friends, Lachlan and Weiss, are actually competing anyway. So he straight up lied. In the meantime, Amber's still like looking around for some truth. But before that, it's time to start running.
I'll be back.
Only in a rerun.
Go!
Yeah, that was so good how they turn around and they're like in this weird position.
Yeah, that looks so
hanging in midair.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, so uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's such a great idea, like having those pods like speeding out into this tiny tube. Like that's a perfect way to start the show, actually, for the Running Man.
Yeah, I wanted to go on that ride. It looks sick.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you can actually stop at some point. Because there's nothing to stop them until they actually get to the end. And they pop out and then they get that barrier, whatever. That's not there later when Killian goes through. And so Amber's like sneaking around and she finds the raw footage of the massacre from the start of the movie. But as she finds it, she gets captured. And then back in the show, Killian gets some audience participation. Everyone's like betting on who will be the first stalker. Wait, was it? It wasn't the same old woman from the end. It was like a different.
No, it's a
old
different
woman,
one.
wasn't it? Different old woman,
Yeah.
yeah. So she's like, Sub-Zero is my favorite. Actually, she wants Sub-Zero to like be the first stalker. So Sub-Zero cuts enemies into bloody sushi with a sharp hockey stick. So he's sort of like E Honda with a hockey stick.
What I noticed that I didn't notice before is they call him Professor Sub-Zero.
Yeah, Professor Sub-Zero, but it never comes up again. Like,
Yeah.
why is he Professor? So it's really weird. And so the three guys, they like come out the other end of the tube and they're getting accosted by the crowd. So there's like huge walls, but then this crowd like lining the walls, and they're like throwing beer cans at them, like swearing at them. And so they enter the first quad. And so we also see another. So the way this film works, there's different groups of spectators in different areas of the city. And so you have the betting group, you have the studio audience, and also the outside audience. And so the camera like goes to each one as things happen.
And there's an audience in like the luxury lounge where the stalkers are waiting to go out as well.
Yeah. And they got like
high profile people, rich elites watching from there too.
And then also the retired stalkers room with different people hanging around. They're all watching the action. And so the first quad is a hockey theme, where the hockey pucks are grenades, which is a great idea. So Ben and his crew, they go in there, like they're almost getting killed. Like Ben gets knocked out, but he sort of gets up and has to face off with Sub-Zero. Yeah, so pretty gruesome death for Sub-Zero, getting almost decapitated by barbed wire. So some quick thinking from Ben Richards. And so the crowd sort of has this stunned reaction to Sub-Zero's death, because stalkers aren't supposed to die. Like, they're supposed to be the ultimate warriors. Like, the runners literally have no weapons. The stalkers have like body armor and everything.
Yeah, it's because they introduced, they introduced that there was previous winners from last season. So you assume that for them to win, they had to kill stalkers, right?
Yeah. But I'm just saying, based on the reaction of the crowd, like there's a stunned silence. Like, you're sort of expecting blood. And so obviously Arnold Schwarzenegger has to have a line after he defeats Sub-Zero. He was Sub-Zero, now he's just plain Zero. And so this episode's getting even more ratings than ever because it's The Butcher of Bakersfield. But next up, it's Buzzsaw and Dynamite.
Buzzsaw Eddie Butowski, last season's leading stalker. Buzzsaw's Hammond and Cates chainsaws are made of Trilon-coated
Yeah, so that guy playing Dynamo was actually like a professional opera singer, so he was actually singing in those scenes, which is kind of random. And so in the middle of the show, Killian announces a mystery contestant. It's Amber Mendez. So she comes out like in the jumpsuit, like struggling. She's like, "What's going on?" And so she also gets a bunch of lies and propaganda about her as well. And like that includes the fact that her and Ben were together. Like, that was some sort of
and the announcer's like trying to make her sound really bad. She's like, she has sexual relationships with 2 and sometimes 3 different guys a year, something like that. Like, that's a good girl today.
Yeah, something really innocuous, like the 3 a year.
2, and
Whoa,
sometimes
she's
3 different partners.
it's a crazy hoe. Yeah. And so back in the game area, Weiss figures they can disrupt the signal and jam the network. Like, he says a bunch of nerdy stuff that I couldn't follow, but basically if you jam the network, you can disrupt the signal and jam the network. And then they can broadcast their own message, which is the truth. And Amber shows up, but then they get ambushed by Buzzsaw and Dynamo at the same time. And then the nerd keeps going on about, they're gonna, jam the uplink for the network satellites, which sort of makes sense. And Buzzsaw is like, he's on a bike, he's on a motorbike. And then Lachlan, he gets cut really badly with Buzzsaw's chainsaw. And then Ben gets like dragged behind the bike. But then Ben, like, he grabs the wire and ties it to a pole, which makes Buzzsaw like fall off his motorcycle. And so Ben, actually no. And so the nerd and Amber, they're like trying to figure out this encryption stuff. And then he sort of cracks the code. And so Amber has to remember a bunch of numbers for the resistance, so the resistance can use the uplink, basically. And then Ben, he walks up to Buzzsaw, who's apparently knocked out, but he's not. And so a fight ensues. It's like a one-on-one fight with Buzzsaw and Ben.
Kids, I love the saw. The saw's part of me. And I'm gonna make it part of you. That's all right. Keep it tight.
Yeah, just over the top. This is great lines. I'm gonna make it part of you. That's right. Keep it. And then later on, he says, so I think Amber says, "Where's Buzzsaw?" And Ben's like, he had to split. They must have had a lot of fun writing these lines.
Some good. I feel like, yeah, all these one-liners is just top tier.
Yeah, top tier. Yeah. So the nerd figures out the code. Do you remember the code?
No, I don't. I know there's B 17, 4. I think it was the last.
Yeah, hold on.
Digits.
Yeah.
I don't remember
1824 61B 17 4.
Yeah.
Which I think would be pretty hard to remember because, like, he tells her the code and she repeats it once, and then they get attacked by Dynamo. And because he electrocutes the nerd.
Yeah, he just dies instantly.
Yeah, he dies after he gets the code, but yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it would have been pretty hard for her to remember after getting attacked and seeing the nerd die. But then Ben comes in, because Dynamo also has a little buggy that he rides in. And so he chases Ben in his buggy. Yeah. And so Ben sort of leads him away because he sort of chases him. And then so Dynamo tries to drive up a pile of junk, but he crashes. And so Ben doesn't kill him. He sort of spares his life, and the audience is really angry.
Overturns his vehicle and he gets stuck, and he's like, "Oh my god, cut, go to a commercial."
Yeah. And so they're sort of running out of stalkers, and so Jim Brown, who plays Fireball, gets called up He's next up as a stalker. And so Weiss is dead. Lachlan's dying. I think they pronounce it Laughlin. Laughlin's dying. So Ben and his Ben's two friends are dead, basically. And we see Killian on the big TV. So Killian's talking to Ben, privately through the TV, this gigantic screen. And so he's offering Ben a 3-year contract to become a stalker for the show. And so we'll say that Ben violently rejects the offer. So he wants nothing to do with Killian. And then Killian gets the Attorney General on the phone, who's probably going to complain about what's happening on the show at the moment. So Fireball is pretty cool.
It's got like a pink flame.
Yeah. I mean, it seems obvious that you would have like a fire stalker at some point. Like you got the ice, you got the fire,
chainsaw guy,
lightning. Lightning. Well, it's funny because in Mortal Kombat you had Raiden, but then also Sub-Zero.
Yeah.
But it'd be fun to come up with different stalkers. Like if you're writing a show like this, come up with different stalkers. Like like we were saying at the start, it's like a very video gaming sort of character development. Video gaming characters. And so the old lady is talking to Killian. So Killian pulls the old lady out of the crowd. And then she predicts that Ben Richards will make the next kill. So, which is like outrageous. And then Killian's like, no, you got to pick a stalker who's going to make the next kill. And she's like, no. she's choosing Ben Richards. And now the people in the gambling area, they're betting on Richards as well. And he's getting 100-1 odds, which is crazy. And so Fireball's in pursuit. And the next bit I said was reminding me of Donkey Kong.
Oh, the barrels.
Throwing barrels. And they explode because they're filled with like fuel. So Fireball's like blowing up barrels that Ben's throwing. Like it's the most video game scene. And Amber gets separated. And so she stumbles on a corpse in this locker room. And it's actually 3 corpses. It's the 3 guys from the start of the show that everyone thinks is in Hawaii, but they're actually dead. It's sort of interesting that they just left those guys to rot in that old like changing room instead of like disposing of them in some way. Like they're just there rotting away underneath, the television studio.
Well, I guess it was like a kind of a trap kind of room where Amber kind of stopped running and started investigating. Oh, the last year's winners, they're dead, and gave Fireball that opportunity to sneak up on her.
Yeah, so Fireball sneaks up on her. But then Ben like swoops in, like knocks him down, pulls his gas line, and then he ignites it with a flare, and then basically Fireball blows up
into a fireball.
He turns into a fireball. And so it's time for Captain Freedom to get to Wardrobe, which is the one thing in the world he doesn't want to do. And so Captain Freedom, he like storms into the production studio. It's like, I don't want to do this. This is ridiculous. Like he's pulling off like his like plastic armor or whatever, like his outfit or his costume. He says he wants to fight hand to hand, not costume like a fool. But then Killian's like, no, you know, you got to get out of there. You got to get out there. You know, I don't care what you think, but Killian like has a plan. But at the same time, Ben has to find the secret broadcast center so we can upload the signal or upload like the truth, basically. And so we're back to the 80s dance routine, but this time it's really somber. It's like really sad dancing at this stage.
Yeah, it's like a memorial dance or the lost stalkers, the fallen stalkers.
And so we get a really interesting, I thought this is interesting from the perspective of the modern era where they're making deep fakes. How it's like the 80s, like pixelated way of making deep fakes. Which is probably to your point from earlier, how it looks dated with, you know, using 80s technology for the future. Well, I thought it was interesting conceptually because it's so easy to make deep fakes these days.
The concepts were, that's part of what made the movie so entertaining. It's things that I really personally enjoy as well.
But it turns out to be all legitimate stuff. Like all this stuff came true, basically. Like it's a really prophetic movie. Like amazingly prophetic. And so Ben, he makes it to the People's Network, which is basically the underground resistance group. And on the TV, they're watching Cap and Ben fighting. Even Amber is there. So Amber gets her neck broken, like right at the start of the fight.
She gets ragdolled, a dead body ragdolled onto some barbed wire.
Yeah, so she goes down really easily. I mean, as you would expect, but we get a nice battle between a really violent battle between Cap and Ben. Yeah, really horrific, horrific violence in that scene. Like just after that, where he gets impaled, you see Jesse Ventura like smiling maniacally with blood just running down his face. Like it's really crazy, horrific. Like the most violent fight scene, I guess, in the movie. They're really well done. Really entertaining to see to see Ben get impaled.
Yeah, I think the audience missed out on that, like the actual proper 1v1 between the two characters, though.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting decision not to have them face off, you know, as runner and stalker, as legitimate runner and stalker. How it's all fake, but then maybe that's the point. Like you want something fake to just re-emphasize the fact that everything's fake in this world and in this TV show. So interesting piece of a very random though interesting piece of casting is Mick Fleetwood, the drummer from Fleetwood Mac. Is a leader of the resistance, like the tall guy with like the gray hair.
Yeah.
So this is randomly Mick Fleetwood's there. And so he's the soft-spoken resistance leader. And then Ben, he wants to go back to get vengeance on Killian. And then Amber, she's got the raw footage from the massacre. Yeah, this is so random but hilarious. Like she's like, oh yeah, I hid the footage somewhere, and it's none of your business. Somewhere it's none of your business. It was so random, but hilarious. And so the rebel team basically has everything they need to take over the studio. They got weapons, they got the truth, they got the raw footage, and so they infiltrate ICS, the television studio. And so they sort of infiltrate the studio, and then they sort of capture like the television production area, and then they can broadcast the truth, like the real story of what happened during the massacre. And so and they have like different like editing in the video, like they're saying like Killian lies to you, and so they're sort of breaking down all the lies that Killian's spreading, or all the government's spreading, or whatever, in the video. And so Ben finally confronts Killian, and then there's a shootout, and so that disperses the crowd. Like the crowd like runs off. And so Ben is going to have his one-on-one time with Killian, but first Amber, she's also there. She's blowing away guards, but then she gets knocked down by Dynamo, and so we get this really hilarious line. Yeah, Amber's got some hilarious lines.
Thought it was pretty funny out there in the zone. What's the matter now, bitch?
Because there's nothing funny about a dickless moron with a battery up his ass.
And the scene afterwards was like really full on.
You cut the bit where he says, "Why aren't you laughing?"
Oh yeah. I forgot about that bit.
Yeah, I love that line.
Yeah.
I used to say it all the time, but I don't say it anymore. I'm gonna have to start saying it again.
Yeah, and he like gets her down, and there's a guy like force himself, like he's got his pants off, like that.
He's wearing like a big
crazy
diaper.
Angle. Yeah, look at this crazy angle from behind. He's wearing his white tidy whities. Like, I'll show you, dickless. Like it was crazy. Like it was just like escalates. It went from 0 to 100 really quickly in that scene. But then she like grabs the gun and shoots a sprinkler, which electrocutes Dynamo, which is a pretty bad design flaw in your outfit if water can actually kill you.
That's
like
why
you would
there's
think you would insulate yourself from that.
That's why there's no water stalkers. No guy with a fire engine or something with a hose blasting people.
Don't get any water on Dynamo. You're gonna kill him. But yeah, it seems like a pretty bad flaw in the design. And so there's a shootout in the studio, and the crowd sort of watching, different crowd areas like watching what's going on. And so finally Ben gets to confront Killian, and then Killian's like huge bodyguard comes out. Like he got this guy with a beard, this huge guy, it's a bodyguard. He just doesn't say anything throughout the movie. And then he comes in, but then he like just turns around, like he nods to Ben and then just turns and leaves. Because he's sick of Killian as well.
He says something like, "I got to score some steroids."
Oh yeah.
He's like
that's right,
Swedish guy. So he's got that accent.
Yeah, because back in the previous scene where Cap is confronting Killian, and Killian's telling the security guard to get Cap out of the room. Killian yells, "What? Steroids make you deaf?" And so this is a callback to that line where it's like, "Oh, I got to get some steroids or something.
I got to score some steroids.
I got to score some steroids." He just walks away. Oh, that was good writing.
That security guy did nothing the whole
Yeah, he
movie.
did nothing. He just sort of stands around.
It's just like this massive presence, and you just assume that he's like a killer or badass or something, and he's just not looking for any kind of conflict.
Yeah, the strong silent type. Yeah. And so Killian has a really interesting speech. He talks about the role of television programming. So the key word there is programming, like programming your mind. And so Killian reveals that, yeah, it is a way to control thought. It's a way to raise children the way, the government wants them to be raised, to have certain ideas, to start the propaganda early. And so Killian, like, basically just chucks him in the tube, in the tube car, in the tube pod, and like sends him off to die, basically. Wait, what was his last line?
It says drop dead. Drop dead. Tells him to drop dead to to Richards, and then he's like, I don't do requests.
Yeah, I don't do yeah. Yeah. And so he sort of sets the pod going, and then the pod comes out of the tube, flies through a poster, and then blows up.
And then classic 80s style, it explodes. Yeah. I don't think there was any engine or anything.
It explodes for no reason. And then Ben says that hit the spot. And then the audience cheers. Ben gets the girl, and it's they live happily ever after. So yeah, so with a lot of these films, there's not much after the climax of the movie. So you kill the bad guy, you defeat the bad guy, and then the movie basically ends at that point, which is fine. I mean, that's how it should end. You don't want to have another half an hour of them talking about what happened.
Yeah,
that's like another strength of the movie. Yeah, typical 80s. Action. You can, all these action movies from the 80s and 90s, you could watch 2 or 3 of them back to back, no problem. They still have time to do other things. So, but one thing I read was that this film was an inspiration for the video game Smash TV.
It was a good old classic on, is it NES or SNES? SNES, I think.
It was 1990, so it would have been NES, right?
Yeah, I think it's NES, yeah. I think Super Nintendo was 92.
Yeah. Was it 92? Yeah, so look at that. Like the television. And then we got the various arenas where, the contestants fight for their lives.
Bingo!
So very similar to Contra in terms of the shooting style. So it was like top down. Let's say you get cash and prizes for killing.
Yeah! Bingo!
So yeah, very violent game. You can see all the limbs flying off the the different dead bodies and stuff. So that's I mean, I guess we're watching violent movies, playing violent games. Like just 80s is just full of violence, I suppose, at the time.
That's entertainment.
That was entertainment.
It's not real violence though, but it was
real
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of there wasn't an angry or like a weird, like degenerate aspect to it. It was just fun. It's hard to explain. Yeah. But that was Running Man. So again, another highly recommended action-packed, entertaining 80s film starring an icon of action cinema, Arnold Schwarzenegger. So yeah, I loved it. I loved watching it again. I was sort of struck by the casting of the movie. I thought the casting was perfect. I thought the female lead was excellent. She was tough and funny without being overbearing.
She was like the original hot Latino action chick before, like Salma Hayek or maybe J-Lo even. I don't know.
J-Lo
like
in
there's others.
in Out of Sight, maybe.
Maybe Out of Sight.
That was Clooney.
Nothing really actiony. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good movie. Excellent all around. It's sort of a fun video gamey type of movie, so highly recommended. What's your final thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, very entertaining. It's fun watching it again after so many years. So many cool ideas and concepts in the movie. Awesome characters. Really captures like the soul of 80s action.
Yeah, but with
like what you said, I feel like a remake would be welcome if they do it right.
And incorporate like modern technology and ideas. But like all the satire, the dystopian stuff, like it's like real life. So what do you do at that point? Like once everything's real, it's not dystopian anymore. Like it's just a documentary. So I guess that would be the challenge. Like how do you take that to the next level if everything's real or everything's actually
I guess if they do a remake, then I guess the runner doesn't win. It's just so the government or whoever's running the elites win in the end. That'll be the
well, the runner joins them. The runner becomes like, but then he's loved by the people as well. So he becomes a bad guy, but to them he's the good guy. And so that's the discrepancy between what the audience perceives and what the characters within the film perceive. So that's the tension. Okay. Well, join us next time for Never Ending Story. When you're talking iconic 80s movies, that's definitely one of the, and something that I was sort of blown away by watching it again. How good that movie was. So I look forward to you having a look at it.
Looking forward to checking it out. It's been over 30 years, I think, at least.
Yeah, probably 30 years. Yeah, it's funny watching movies after 30 years. How things change, how you sort of view them differently. But but this was really an amazing movie. So, all right, thanks everyone for watching. We'll see everybody next time. Join us next time as we sip more booze. See you later.
Cheers. Until next time.
Cheers. Till next time.